The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Political scientist Arthur Lupia explains why most people are ignorant about political issues and why Democrats fail to provide quick and easy answers. Ethics advocate Jeff Hauser runs down the astounding number of Trump's conflicts of interest. And Tom Perez, candidate for chair of the DNC, tells Bill Press the party needs to knock on doors at the state and local level. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Political scientist Arthur Lupia, an expert on voter ignorance, says most people want quick and easy answers to their problems. We say hello to Arthur Lupia, political science professor at the University of Michigan and chair of National Research Council's Roundtable on the Application of Behavioral and Social Science. He's also the author of a book, Uninformed, Why People Know So Little About Politics and What We Can Do About It. Arthur Lupia, thank you very much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you with us. A year ago, everyone was laughing, myself included, in a way, at Donald Trump's astounding perversion of things that we know to be true. Now he's president of the United States. Does that mean voters value ignorance or can't tell the difference between fact and fiction?
It's not quite as simple as that. Politics is really complicated, and most voters focus on politics through the lens of two or three issues that they really care about and their partisanship. So most people, if we ask them questions about the details of politics, are ignorant about almost everything. So you can't hold that against one group. But what Trump was able to do was really tell a different story about America that really resonated with some part of the electorate. And a lot of people were surprised that it worked.
In a nutshell, why is it that people know so little about politics? Is it the media's fault?
Well, if you think for a minute about what is politics, and there's two aspects of it. One, politics is the domain of life where we deal with the hard issues, where we deal with things where our values come into conflict. Abortion is a political issue because people have very deeply held values, but the values really bring them to different conclusions. And so we can't handle that just through kind of normal conversation. We try and have a political process to manage it. Other issues like child labor are not really political anymore in the sense they're more moral and ethical because we have a moral consensus. So that makes politics difficult because the issues that are, the hot button political issues of a day are the really hard problems. And it's hard to know things about them. The other reason that people know so little is there are so many issues. There are, so many issues at the national level. Then you have issues at the state and local level. And then you have issues all over the world that affect people's lives in different ways. And so nobody can be an expert on all of them. Few people are experts on any of them. And so at some point, ignorance is where we are. And one of the great challenges of democracy is how we deal with our ignorance to try and make decent decisions nevertheless.
And I guess to some degree, it's also how much do I care about being informed about a particular topic? It has no bearing on me, so I don't really care if I know about it or not.
There's a big truth to that. I mean, some of the Trump appeal, I live in the Midwest, some of the Trump appeal was to people who live in towns here where for generations they had worked in certain types of industries, certain types of factories. And over the last generation, those factories and industries, people know a lot about that. They don't know a lot about Syria. They don't know a lot about the euro. And, part of the reason is because they're having an existential crisis at home. What will I do? How will I live? And it takes all of their working day to make ends meet and to try and figure out their lives. They don't have time to think about things that aren't immediately relevant to their ability to feed their family the next week.
And I guess, while you can certainly point to the failure of media, schools, other institutions to communicate effectively with voters, at some point, isn't it the voters' fault that they're ignorant? I mean, I think there are a lot of people that could know a lot more.
Yeah, I've studied this for 30 years, and so what is undeniable is that most people are ignorant of most aspects of politics. In fact, one misconception I want to clear up is that there are some people in the country who aren't ignorant of a lot of politics. There's so much going on that we can't help be ignorant, but all of it. At the same time, we live in a democracy. We have responsibilities to one another. And so, and the choices that we have on a ballot, I mean, even though politics is really complicated, when you get to a ballot, oftentimes there are 2 or 3 choices. And so it's not as if you're being asked to write a novel or do rocket science. You're asked to choose the best choice of 2 or 3 on a ballot. And so in that case, people have responsibilities to themselves, their families, and their communities to become informed about which of those choices would help improve quality of life the most. So there is some responsibility. But politics is so emotionally taxing for some folks that what they really want is a quick and easy answer to their questions. And if somebody gives them one, oftentimes they'll follow that person.
We're speaking with Arthur Lupia, political science professor at the University of Michigan, chair of National Research Council's Roundtable on the Application of Behavioral and Social Science, and author of the book Uninformed, Why People Know so little about politics and what we can do about it. Arthur, where do voters get most of their information, at least the information they use to make political decisions?
Yeah. Today, people get information from sources that they trust. And the good news is that there are so many more sources of political information now than there ever have been before. But the bad news is that there are so many more sources of information that there have been before. And so what we see is people really selecting information based not on its accuracy, but based on how it makes them feel and whether it supports their self-esteem. So the rise of things like Fox News on the right and MSNBC, at least in its previous incarnation on the left, was providing not just objective news, but some facts about the world wrapped in a veneer of a real strong partisan worldview. And so for people who are trying to figure out complicated political things, having someone, digest part of it for you and say, look, here's a couple facts, but the way that people like us see it is as follows, that can be really comforting to folks. And again, if politics is complicated for them and it's kind of emotionally taxing, they don't want to think about, why the other side might be right, going to a source that will say, here's what people like us believe, can be very comforting. So more and more we find people getting information from partisan sources.
And the 30-second television spot. I mean, it seems like sometimes you hear people having conversations and all they're talking about is what you just heard in a 30-second television spot.
It's true, but Jim, I'm guessing that you and I are about the same age, and one of the things that's happening in a lot of races is they're not going on television anymore. A number of the ads are going direct to Twitter or to Facebook or to video, and so it's not just the 30-second ad. It's a video that's targeted to a particular audience with a slogan that they think will work for them. It's interesting. One of the things that's happened in the last 5 or 6 years is how many candidates have really gone away from television.
That is, yeah, and I am always playing catch up, of course, and you're
you and me both.
Age.
You and me both.
Yeah, right. But it is pretty fascinating that it doesn't take much, it seems, to sway somebody, because it's almost, here's what I want to hear, and now I'm going to go with that. So.
Yeah, if you think that, I'd say most of Americans, according to polls, I'd say between 70 and 80% of Americans, they know which way they lean. They know that they lean to the left or they lean to the right. And what they're looking for is a trusted source on their side to tell them what's going on. There's another 30% who, for various reasons, aren't connected to red or to blue, and they're looking at other sources of information. They're trying to figure it out. But right now in this country, at least 2/3 already know, how they're going to vote in 2020, for example. So they're trying to look for information about how people like us should make a decision like the one in front of us.
Do schools do a good enough job at teaching civics and how to think critically?
That's a long debate. So I will say there are a lot of people working really hard on civic education in schools, out of schools, and I wouldn't for a moment want to criticize the great people in every state in this country who are really trying to do this. On the other hand, we have some dated beliefs about the best ways to teach civics and politics. So I can tell you, in an internet age where people have smartphones and they can check them during class or they can check them when they're walking home, the eat your spinach approach to civic education does not work. So if the idea, you need to learn a set of facts, I'm not really going to tell you why, it's just your duty, so memorize them, and maybe in 10 or 20 years you'll figure out why they matter. That doesn't work. That type of approach, you lose the battle of attention to Pokemon Go and to flashy videos by candidates who want to tell you what to think. So a more kind of integrated approach to education where you give people the information, but you allow them to experience what it would be like to make a decision or to take the point of view of a recipient of a service or something and say, this is why government matters so much, because it affects healthcare, it affects education. These are more effective ways to convey learning, and they're possible in the flipped classrooms of today. So some schools are doing that, but some schools are still teaching it the old-fashioned way and getting the results that, students don't care and they don't form a lifetime attachment to the idea that participating is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems the schools ought to take advantage of the way kids are acting and jump on it that way. I remember as a kid, I had a history teacher. He knew that most of the kids in the class were interested in sports, and so he directed most of his lessons via sports. We played football games on the chalkboard. The class was split up in half, and all of those lessons, I remember all of that. I remember all of the information from because he taught it in a way that was interesting to us.
That's it's really the only way to do it. I mean, we can try and force people to remember facts, but memory doesn't really favor that. Memory, we are more likely to form memories when we're so engaged in something and so interested in a problem that even though a teacher's in the room, we're doing the work trying to figure out how does this work and how is this relevant. And so teachers in schools who can create experiences where people can see what the democratic process is really like and the students can understand on their own, boy, I can really make a difference in my community, in my town, just by knowing this or by understanding that. That's where the lifelong attachments come from. And I can say in the civic education enterprise in this country as a whole, more and more people are moving in that direction.
Well, that's good to hear. Now, should people look to their political leaders for reliable information or the news media? Are we at a stage where everybody simply has his or her own truth?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, certainly people on the left and people on the right see things in different ways. And, anyone who wants to try and talk to both sides has to work hard to think about what are the common values held by people on the left and the right. And there are a lot of common values. During elections, we focus on the differences. That's what candidates do, because if a candidate tells you they're the same as the other person, there's no reason to vote for them. So during elections, we really focus on differences, but there are still opportunities to find the common challenges faced by many people and talk to them that way. So political leaders who can figure out how to do that have real advantages. The news media is a different story because, as you know, the news media is under tremendous pressure. People don't want to pay for content. People want to get everything for free. That has led the traditional media organizations and the new media organizations to fire a lot of their experienced reporters, to get rid of a lot of the support staff they had in previous generations. And lots of news content is now produced by freelancers or people who aren't very experienced or people who don't have a lot of resources. So I think we were all disappointed in some ways in how the news media reported this last election and how much they just kind of repeated what the candidates said as opposed to try and take a more objective view. So I think at this point, unless there are changes in the news media, they are an increasingly difficult place to try and find high-quality, objective information.
Okay. Arthur Lupia, political science professor at the University of Michigan and chair of National Research Council's Roundtable on the Application of Behavioral and Social Science, and author of the book Uninformed, Why People Know So Little About Politics and What We Can Do About It. Arthur, thank you so much for your time with us today on AmericasDemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thanks for having me.
and we appreciate your time. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Washington ethics expert Jeff Hauser thinks it's time to reinstate shame to the political process. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Trump, Trump, Trump. Troops are marching to battle. Boom, boom, boom. Bombs are blowing up communities. Whoosh. Poisonous gas is being released. Forget Syria, ISIS, Iran, Afghanistan. This is Trump's war. Our bellicose commander-in-chief is at war in the homeland, deploying his troops to attack everything from our public schools to the EPA, dropping executive order bombs on Muslim communities in the Mexican border, and spewing poisonous tweets of bigotry and right-wing bile at the media, scientists, inner cities, illegal voters, Meryl Streep, diplomats, Democrats, people who use real facts, and, well, Trump is at war with the American majority, with all who do not agree with him. And you thought Nixon had a long enemies list. Yet, Trump's most destructive assault so far has not targeted any one group, but an essential and existential concept: truth. Bluntly put, he's psychotic, believing that truth is whatever he says it is, and that he can change it tomorrow. Years ago, in a futuristic novel, the author wrote about the rise of a tyrannical regime that ruled by indoctrinating the masses to accept the perverse notion of capricious truth. It was George Orwell's 1984, which depicted a dystopia he named Oceania. There, the public had been inculcated to believe that reality is not, quote, something objective, external, existing in its own right. Rather, whatever the party holds to be truth is truth. Now, in 2017, we live in Trumplandia, with a delusional leader of a plutocratic party trying to redefine reality with alternative facts and fake news. This is Jim Hightower saying, but resistance is already surging, including the fact that Orwell's 70-year-old book has become a bestseller again, thanks to Trump resistors seeking, truth.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Jeff Hauser is executive director of the Revolving Door Project, and he says what we don't know about Trump's massive conflicts of interest is more important than what we do know. And we say hello to Jeff Hauser, who runs the Revolving Door Project, which is an effort to increase scrutiny on executive branch appointments and ensure that political appointees are focused on serving the public interest rather than personal professional advancement. Jeff Hauser, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you with us. Donald Trump says presidents, by definition, cannot have conflicts of interest, at least not illegal ones. What do you say to that?
I think that Donald Trump is in serious legal danger if he actually believes that, but who the heck knows if he actually believes it. There are many ethics laws that apply to the president. There are many laws against bribery and receiving benefits from foreign countries, and there's a Stock Act which applies to both members of Congress and the executive branch, including expressly the president, that would limit his ability to, say, insider trade. There are many ethics laws that apply to the president. There is a specific law that does not apply to the president, although it's been consistent practice across presidents of both parties for the last 40-odd years to act like that law applies. And so it's problematic that he is apparently seeking to avoid those responsibilities that presidents of both parties have acceded to. But, yeah, there are many different laws that apply to him. And, in fact, there are specific parts of the Constitution, the quote-unquote emoluments clauses, that very much apply to the president and create constitutional threats to Trump if he were to violate them, in addition to the more standard civil and criminal laws that apply to public officials. And, of course, there's also impeachment. And that may not seem on the cusp now, but obviously things can change and polling can drip for presidents who have serious problems with corruption.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I will say that at least the House has reversed itself on getting rid of its ethics office, so we have that. But can President Trump ever really get rid of his multiple conflicts of interest, even if he wanted to?
I think there are ways to alleviate his unique situation. Dean Baker of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, where my project is housed, has a proposal out that basically he would get independent auditors to value the Trump organization, take the middle value, buy an insurance policy to say that that is worth what it is, and he'll be made well if he doesn't get that median access, and then hire someone to sell it so that he's protected on the one hand with the charity in case the middle audit fails him, and if it does better than the middle audit, he can give the money to a charity that he specifies, a real charity, not the Trump Foundation, but a real charity. So I think there are other clever ways to get around this as well, where he could sell and sell quickly, or at least lock in his value at where it is now, and not how the Trump organization may well grow in value as foreign countries and domestic companies alike try to buy public policy by giving money to the Trump organization, which obviously is a very real threat right now.
You know, if he has to sell everything publicly, he might have to actually be forced to pay taxes publicly as well. I mean, it would be a lot more scrutiny than the usual business deal that he did prior to becoming president. So that would be interesting to see. And, you know, I don't even know where to begin when it comes to conflicts of interest here. I mean, his foreign investments, his Washington hotel, his children's business interests. Is there an issue that stands out that's paramount here?
Well, I think actually you alluded to one of the issues that is of most interest to me, which is his taxes. He claims to have been under audit for the last couple of decades, which suggests that even by his own accounting, his accounting is being called into question consistently by career civil servants at the IRS. That's interesting and concerning, but it's also noteworthy that in several months he is going to have the opportunity to appoint a new head of the IRS. The current IRS chair, his term ends in November of this year. So that's an amazing conflict of interest, that a man who brags about how his taxes are constantly being audited will get to choose his auditor. That's a real worry. But in general, I'm more concerned about what we don't know about than what we do know about. So we know a fair amount about a bunch of assets. We know some about his debts, increasingly more, but I don't think we have the full picture of either. And so on the things where we know about it, where it's the Trump Hotel in D.C., it's a real concern, but at least we have a sense of it. It's a known known, to use Donald Rumsfeld's kind of term. But I think we know that of the 96 shell companies that the Trump organization has created, some of them have hidden assets that we know nothing about, and others probably have hidden debts. So we don't know to whom he owes money. Is it Vladimir Putin or one of the oligarchs in Russia? Could be. We don't know. So I am mostly worried about the assets and debts that we don't know about more than I am concerned about the assets that we do know about.
Well, and then what are the foreign policy implications of Trump's financial dealings in Russia, Germany, Japan, China?
Well, what we know about Trump is that he has very little interest in public policy, and that even during the course of running for a campaign, he has gotten no better than a few talking points deep on any issue other than maybe trade and his kind of appalling views on immigration. Everything else seems to be opportunistic. And so if he views an opportunistic policy not as it's opportunistic in order to generate a positive public approval rating, but rather opportunistic to advance the Trump family's financial interests, he can switch on a dime because it's not like he's established a well-articulated policy with respect to Europe or Japan. I mean, he has made statements about Russia and China, but the Russia statements are very consistent with having lucrative side dealings with Russian oligarchs. On China, I think, he might be open to business. It does seem like he's potentially making money in Taiwan as he is attacking China and the one China policy. I mean, some of these positions on various issues may be defensible by other people who come at those issues from a stance of public policy, but it's very hard to know as of now what statements and policies that Trump would pursue are going to be based in his best take on what's right for America versus how he's going to make the Trump organization rich again.
We're speaking with Jeff Hauser, who runs the Revolving Door Project. Does Trump's refusal to release his tax returns set a new precedent for all future candidates? I mean, clearly a good portion of the public doesn't seem to care.
I think that the public does care, and I think we saw that in the Mitt Romney case where he really did want to get away with not hiding the tax returns and was ultimately compelled to make them public. I honestly think the Clinton campaigns messed this situation up. They decided to focus kind of exclusively on Trump's abhorrent conduct and temperament, and those are obviously very valid issues, and I share those concerns. They kind of focused so heavily on that issue and spent so little time talking about Trump's problematic business history, his tax return, and the conflicts of interest that President Trump would represent, that I don't know that the voters were really presented this issue front and center. I don't believe there was a single campaign ad by the Clinton campaign about his hiding his tax returns. And so I don't know that we can really blame the public for this. I think that the issue was just never really presented to them in a consistent and clear manner. So I do not think that any other candidate could get away with this. And I think if the Democrats do their job now, and Republicans of goodwill as well, if they do their patriotic duty, I think Trump will eventually feel real pain on this. I would not draw too much of a negative conclusion just because of the way the campaign went down.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about the Republican Congress, which has investigative oversight responsibility? Will they really care about the conflicts of interest of Trump and his cabinet officers, so many of whom are billionaires?
I think that there is a point at which Trump is enormously less popular than even George W. Bush was at this point in time 16 years ago, despite the fact, and they're pretty similar situations in which you had contentious campaigns in which each of them lost the popular vote. But at this point in time, Bush had roughly 60% approval, and there was a bipartisan consensus to give him a chance. Whether or not I shared that view in 2001 or think it was correct, as a matter of political fact, Trump is without precedent in how unpopular he is right now. If he were to lose any of the support he already has, I think that Republicans would be emboldened, because if President Trump is below 40% approval rating, that puts the House of Representatives in play into 2018. And that allows Republicans who are purely opportunistic and self-interested, like Speaker Ryan, all of a sudden an opportunity to start caring about issues in ethics. So even if you're skeptical about how much the House of Representatives is going to care about Trump's ethics when he's at 45% approval, I think you will be surprised how much they might want to distance themselves from President Trump if he's at 35% or lower approval. So I think it's really about how popular is Trump at any given moment, whether or not Republicans will or will not have a spine.
Now, Betsy DeVos, she gave tons of campaign money, she and her family, tons of campaign money to senators who were on her confirmation committee. Is there any way to police or prevent that? Or perhaps it's not a problem since the contributions are public knowledge?
I think that it's deeply problematic, and it's definitely an area in which we should look to figure out what rules we can put in place in the future. I mean, some of it is probably hard to completely fix, because obviously if she gave enormous money to the Heritage Foundation or to Cato or other right-wing institutions, she could earn a lot of goodwill even outside of campaign finance contributions. And she could fund, third-party efforts, and she has actually funded a lot of super PACs and the like. So I think that it is a problem. I think writing the right rule to police or prevent it is doable but challenging. But I think that it's illustrative of the fact that we need to reinstate shame in our public process. Basically, in the past, one could have done, appointed people like that who are major donors to positions, but there was just a sense of shame, and there was a bipartisan sense that that's just not something we do. And the Trump administration seems to be about the process of undercutting our sense of shame as a country. And I think that we should try to rally around the norms and ethics and values that we used to share broadly, and try to make our values great again in the world. And that would create a world in which no one would even think twice about the possibility of nominating someone as unqualified but rich as Betsy DeVos.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Jeff Hauser runs the Revolving Door Project, again, an effort to increase scrutiny on executive branch appointments and ensure that political appointees are focused on serving the public interest. Jeff, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back with us again soon.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And we appreciate your time. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Tom Perez, who's running to become chair of the DNC.
Democrats will be meeting in Atlanta, the Democratic National Committee, to elect the next chairman of the Democratic National Committee. We know that there are 11 candidates, and 2 or 3 of them have already been in studio with us. We are very pleased to welcome today one of the front runners, for sure, a former Labor Secretary and a good friend of the program, Tom Perez, in studio. Hey, Tom, it's nice to see you.
Great to be here, Bill.
Mr. Secretary.
Tom's a lot quicker.
Tom's a lot quicker, yeah, right. So, not that you have any power over this, but what was your reaction to Donald Trump's nomination of Neil Gorsuch last night to the Supreme
Well, it wasn't
Court.
a surprise. I mean, what did he say during the campaign? I'm going to use abortion rights as a litmus test. And what do you have here? You've got somebody who has said that, he's very clear on where he is on reproductive rights. I mean, this judge dissented from a case in Utah involving those BS allegations against Planned Parenthood, and then the governor of Utah had pulled their money, and they had to go to court, and they won an injunction. And who dissented in the 10th Circuit? It was Judge Gorsuch. So, yeah, I mean, Donald Trump was very transparent. You know, Clarence Thomas is my idol on the court, and I'm going to appoint somebody who doesn't support a woman's right to choose. Frankly, if your number one issue as a listener is clean air and clean water and climate change, he has some very extreme positions on the ability of federal agencies to regulate in that space, and that should scare you as well.
Yeah, even this Roberts Court upheld the EPA's right, and to enforce the law.
I mean, when he says human life is fundamentally and inherently valuable, and that intentional taking of human life by private persons is always wrong, that doesn't sound like there's a lot of wiggle room there. And and Mitch McConnell said, "I don't want to change the ideological makeup of the court." That's what he's trying to do. This is Justice Scalia redo, and that's not what the American people need.
So, if you're a DNC chair, what is your message to Democrats, and what would your message to Democrats in Congress be when they're faced with this nominee?
Well, I think you got to use the tools in your toolbox, one of which is a filibuster. Period.
Basically the same consideration they gave Merrick Garland.
Well, I listened to some Republicans this morning talk about we need 9 justices on the court.
I know.
Well, I'm touched by your newfound concern for a full court. I mean, hypocrisy knows no bounds. And here's the bottom line. I mean, I've said this many times, Bill. People ask, how should we treat Donald Trump? I think we should accord him the same courtesy that Mitch McConnell accorded to Barack Obama, which was none whatsoever.
Amen.
And I think, frankly, that perhaps one of the errors we made in the Obama administration, with hindsight, was that we tried to work with folks for too long, and we thought that in 2009, in the depths of the Great Recession, when the American people were suffering at great lengths, when we had 2 wars to fight and bring to a conclusion, that maybe Republicans during those circumstances, the most dire of certainly our lifetime, would want to come together, and they didn't. And so we have the consequences there. I mean, we couldn't get the Recovery Act was, if anything, we needed it to be more robust. But the president, he could only get so much from the Republican Congress. So I think we have to. I would love to go high when they go low, but the reality is right now there's an unmitigated assault on the labor movement. There's a simultaneous assault on Planned Parenthood. Why are those 2 things going on at the same time? Because that's the organizing infrastructure of the progressive movement. If you can continue to go after labor unions, and you continue, Planned Parenthood, not only is 1 in 5 women are using Planned Parenthood for health services, but in addition, Planned Parenthood, they have great grassroots organizing to educate people, not simply about reproductive health, but about their rights more broadly. And there's this unmitigated assault on these basic foundations of organizing, and we've got to fight back. We can't. We've got to bring very aggressive tools to this fight.
Now, let's talk about the fight for DNC chair. What is the state of the Democratic Party today, as you see it, and what's the remedy?
Sure. Well, I think the Democratic Party, and I've said this in some of our campaign forums, we're suffering from a crisis of relevance and a crisis of confidence. What happened in the run-up to the primary last year, the absence of transparency, all of the things we know about created a crisis of confidence. And we need to make sure, because right now this is a where were you moment.
Confidence,
Bill.
you mean people don't believe in the party? Is that what
people.
don't trust
People. There was no transparency. So when you're not transparent, you undermine trust, and so we've got to rebuild that trust. Our big tent is our biggest strength, and the good news for me, Bill, is I think the challenges that we confront are very fixable. This is a turnaround job. There's no doubt about it. We've got to take the fight to Donald Trump. We've got to communicate clearly our progressive values of economic opportunity for all, economic security for all. This is not a nation of oligarchs. It's a nation of people who, when you work hard and play by the rules, the sky is the limit. The system isn't rigged against you. This is a nation in which we value our diversity. We don't divide people along racial or ethnic or socioeconomic or any other lines. We bring people together. Those are the values of the Democratic Party. So we need someone who can take the fight to Donald Trump. We need someone who can make sure that we have a Democratic Party in every single state and the territories that's functioning well. People always ask me, how do you get the House back?
Yeah.
Well, when you get state houses back, you're going to get the U.S. House of Representatives back as well. And because we have not invested sufficiently in state parties, we're seeing we saw the losses, over 900 state legislative seats lost in the course of the last 8 years. We can fix this when we invest in our infrastructure. We need to be fielding candidates from the school board to the Senate. We need to be supporting those efforts. I talked to a party chair, Bill, out in Wyoming, and she recruited something like 60 Democrats to run for office in 2016, called the DNC for help. And they told her, sorry, can't help you. I mean, the DNC, one of our core jobs has to be helping with both candidate recruitment and candidate training. I want all the grassroots organizers around America, not all, but I want us to have a core competency to create and support organizing, because the reason we lost in so many places, Bill, is because we didn't make house calls. We've got to get out there and organize. Mitt Romney got more votes than Donald Trump in Wisconsin, but we lost Wisconsin because we didn't talk to people in Milwaukee. You can't just show up at a church every 4th October and call that an organizing strategy. And then we got clobbered in rural Wisconsin, where Barack Obama was very competitive, because we weren't organizing there. Mm-hmm. Data analytics is fine and it's important, but it can't supplant grassroots organizing. And that's what the party has to get back to. When we get back to our roots and talk to people, engage people, communicate our message of economic opportunity, we are the party of the people. We're not the party of the oligarchs and the billionaires that are in Donald Trump's cabinet.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Arthur Lupia, Jeff Hauser, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.